good afternoon. We are so excited to be back with you guys again. It's been a long year, but we're really excited. We had fall spring here last week in North Dakota, and so this is the perfect time to be back in right now listening to webinars and making a plan because it's kind of cold out again today. So we're excited to be here with you. I'm Mary Keena, the Livestock Environmental Management Specialist at the Carrington Research Extension Center with NDSU. And on today, and our presenter is going to be Paige Brummund, who is our Agriculture and Natural Resource Extension Agent in Ward County. And so just a quick reminder, as we get rolling today, I'm going to hit send on the chat. We have this demographic survey up. If you guys want to scan the QR code and just share your demographics with us, otherwise the link is in the chat. You can type that in. And we have 3 webinars in our series this year. And so this week, the following week, and then we'll end the last week of March. And so we are talking about breeding management today. We're going to talk about foaling management next week, and then we're going to talk about small scale management the following week. And so 3 as opposed to our typical 4, but we probably have some one-offs that we're planning for later in the year. And so for the spring, we're going to stick with these 3. This is based on information that you guys sent back and said, hey, this is something we'd really like to know about. And so we really appreciate all of the feedback that you guys share with us. And again, we're excited to be here. So with that, let's get rolling with today's webinar. Again, Paige is your presenter today. I will be over in the chat visiting. And so if you have questions, put them there. Depending on where we're at in the presentation, I'll either stop Paige and have her go ahead and answer them right away, or we'll save a few for the end. And so with that, I'll keep everybody muted and cameras off until we're done. And Paige, it's all yours.
Okay, so we're going to talk about breeding management of mares in northern climates. So North Dakota and then also some of our surrounding states have a similar climate, and these things will be very applicable to them. So first things first, let's talk about some of the challenges of breeding mares, particularly in North Dakota and these further northern climates. So it goes without saying that we have some pretty harsh weather, and most of us probably haven't forgotten that just less than a month ago that we had some really extreme variations in temperatures in North Dakota. And that chart there shows that we were down setting records at -30 some degree below zero air temperature. And then in the following week, all the way up to well above freezing. So big temperature swings of 80, 90 degrees or more across the state. So that harsh weather conditions can really make it a challenge when we're breeding and foaling mares in the north. Because of this, we also have a shorter natural breeding season. So typically, if left to their own devices, mares in North Dakota aren't going to start to cycle on their own until the end of April through maybe May for a lot of mares. So this shortens our natural breeding season when we have stallion stations and stallions that are stopping collections and stopping shipping semen in anywhere from mid-June to early July. Another challenge we have here in North Dakota is veterinarian availability. So not just a shortage of veterinarians, but also large animal veterinarians, and then those that are able and willing to work on horses. And then even further, not all veterinarians that work on horses have the time or the ability to kind of specialize in that reproductive work. So our veterinarian shortage is something that we address as a challenge in North Dakota. Related to that, we don't have equine reproduction facilities readily available either. So sometimes you might see facilities that are based in other states where there's these large stallion operations, these big stallion stations and mare hotels where they have many, many veterinarians and employees and technicians, stallion managers, mare managers, foal managers, a lot of people that are there to help get your mare in foal and foal her out safely. Another challenge that we have is distance to emergency care. So when something goes wrong, being able to get access to that emergency care for your horse is definitely a challenge. And then lastly, we have limited months of pasture availability. So a challenge for some is needing that increased feed and hay on hand to feed that mare the extra feed that she needs, and then that growing foal as well. Next thing we want to briefly touch on is responsible horse breeding. So consider if you're thinking of breeding a mare, just consider the current market and industry outlook. And for some, the reason they're deciding to breed mares currently is because the industry is doing okay and the outlook looks all right. However, there's still many unwanted horses both in the state and across the country. So consider what your goal is for that foal and what your plan is if you aren't able to sell that foal or personal financial situations come along where you're no longer able to care for it. Thinking those things through is responsible horse care and management. The other thing to think about is the suitability of the mare and the stallion of these breeding animals. You want to evaluate their conformation, their soundness, their genetic compatibility, and again, what that intended use for that foal is. What's the plan? So on that note, here's a list of some reasons to maybe not breed, or at least to really think through and make sure that you're being a responsible breeder. So one of these things could be soundness concerns. So sometimes we'll hear that, well, the mare was injured, so I'm going to breed her. And sometimes that is the mare has an injury, she's healed, and it's not something that is a heritable unsoundness, and that certainly might be a good option for you and your mare. If the soundness issue is something that is inheritable, maybe it's something you want to reconsider. Conformational concerns or poor conformation is something that might be a reason to not breed your mare. If your mare is in poor health, she's ill, has a low body condition score, trouble keeping weight, those would be reasons to not breed the mare. If you have disposition concerns about the mare, so we'll hear sometimes too where, well, I couldn't get her started under saddle. She bucks, she's hard to catch, she's aggressive, she bites, she kicks. Some of those disposition concerns would be a reason to not breed your mare. Oftentimes, those can be taught or passed down to the foal by the mare. So they can learn some of those poor habits as well. So that would be another reason not to breed. If you have any financial uncertainty in the upcoming years, that might be a reason not to breed. Lack of adequate facilities, lack of knowledge of mare and foal care, or the lack of willingness or desire to learn about mare and foal care, a lack of a plan of that resulting foal, and a idea that you're going to get rich quick by breeding would be additional reasons to not breed. More often than not, those that are breeding a few horses aren't in it to make money. And oftentimes when you evaluate the costs and figure out your budget, you'll realize that it's maybe a little bit more than we thought it would be upfront. So with that, let's talk just a little bit about the importance of budgeting and calculating the expenses of breeding your mare. There is a cost to breed versus figuring a cost to buy a horse at a weanling age, a yearling age, or a 2-year-old, or even as a broke horse where you can evaluate a little bit more about what you're going to get. And these will vary depending upon your situation. So I didn't put any actual hard numbers and figures in here. I just want you to think about these things and develop your own budget for your mare. So here's some considerations. We have the stud fee, and in North Dakota, that might be anywhere from $1,000 to upwards of $10,000, depending upon the stud that you're choosing to breed to. You'll have the registration fees and maybe some incentive or enrollment fees, depending upon the discipline that your foal is going to be geared towards. And those can really add up in a hurry too. So figuring those out is essential. You want to have a rough estimate of the veterinary fees for not only breeding your mare, but for caring for the mare throughout the duration of her pregnancy and raising that foal. What about additional cycles and costs of getting that mare bred on an additional cycle if she doesn't take the first time? And then the expenses of foaling out that mare as well. Roughly, it can be anywhere from $1,000 or $2,000 per cycle to get a mare and foal, just depending upon your veterinary costs and expenses in your area. The other thing to think about is the added cost of mare care and boarding while your mare is either at a veterinary clinic or at a breeding facility getting bred or having to be hauled back and forth, however it works in your area. And then if you're going to hire somebody or send your mare to a foaling facility to be foaled out, that's an additional expense as well. There's a few different or additional vaccinations required above the normal maintenance, as well as additional feed in that late gestation and early lactation stage. that will be above the normal maintenance and care of the mare. Something you might want to consider is if there's an expense for the loss of the use of that mare during the time that she is gestating that foal and then raising and lactating that foal. And then the expense of the foal itself until it's to a saleable age. So depending upon whether you are planning to sell that foal at weanling or at yearling or as a 2-year-old or older, you're going to have some expenses that are significant on that end of it. We also recommend that you have an emergency fund set up if something comes up, medical wise, or who knows with horses, right? So always having an emergency fund is recommended. And then insurance costs might be something to factor in as well. So again, that's not a complete list, but it gives you an idea of things to really sit down to research so you can put together a budget that works for you. All right, so let's say we did that. We decided, yep, we're making a responsible breeding choice. We have the financials lined up where this is going to work. This is what we want to do. We're going to breed our mare. Here's some things to consider before getting to that point. You want to have a breeding soundness exam done. This is a good time to establish veterinary care, to visit with your veterinarian and say, look, are you able to assist me in getting my mare bred, or do you have recommendations of a veterinarian who can? During that breeding soundness exam, your mare is going to be evaluated for external anatomy. They're going to do an ultrasound exam of her reproductive organs and possibly a culture and a biopsy when that mare is cycling in heat to determine if there is an infection and suitability of the uterus for supporting that growing foal. The other thing you want to do is select a stallion well in advance of time when you're going to need semen from that stallion. So you need to complete the contract, get with the stallion owner, the stallion manager, really make sure you read and understand the terms of that contract as well. You also need to know where the stallion is located and when the stallion will be available for being able to send semen. And that will vary depending upon the stallion station and maybe that horse's show or exhibition schedule. You also want to think about when you want your mare to foal and determine that desired month of foaling. The average gestation of a mare is around that 335 to 342 range, and that's days, so approximately 11 months. However, that's just the average. We really need mare owners to be prepared for that mare to foal at 320 days or even earlier. So 320 days is considered early, or anything before 320 is considered a little premature. Typically, anything before 300 days is considered non-viable. So I'd always say make sure that you're ready to go in that early 300 days of gestation and you're ready for that mare to foal. So when you're calculating when you want to breed your mare, you want to do the math backwards so you know that you're prepared and able to foal her out in the month of your choice. So how do we manage the breeding season up here in North Dakota? Mares are seasonally polyestrous horses, and that's regulated by a photoperiod. So that means that the amount of light compared to darkness determines when they start cycling. They cycle during a set season, and they have multiple estrus cycles. So that's where seasonally polyestrous comes from. The season when they are not cycling or their ovaries aren't active, there isn't a lot of follicular development, is that winter season, usually November to March. Then we also have that transitional estrus season, which is actually occurring now. So if you have a mare at home and you say, wow, she's starting to cycle, it seems like she's been in heat forever. She's really showing a lot of signs of estrus. She's likely in that transitional period. And that's where there's a lot of multiple waves of follicular development where follicles are growing and then they're regressing and they're growing and they're regressing, but they're not actually ending in ovulation. So this mare will show signs of heat during this transitional period, but is not actually reaching a follicle of the size and stage that allows it to ovulate. And if there's no ovulation, there's no possibility of pregnancy or no conception that's going to occur. So that transitional phase can be a little frustrating for mare owners when they're excited to breed, but they're not actually progressing the way you'd like them to. This also occurs in the fall, but typically we don't recognize as much because not many people are breeding in the fall season in North Dakota. The natural breeding season, if you just leave the mare to her own devices, typically they're going to cycle and ovulate naturally in the months of May through September. That's where they'll have their typical 21-day cycle ending in ovulation. So how can we manipulate this? How can we manage this to have foals earlier? So you may have people that are foaling right now or have been foaling for a month or two, and how does that happen? Let's talk a little bit about why that happens first. So there is a preference for some foals to be born earlier in the year, even in locations with severe climates such as we have in North Dakota. And one of the reasons for this is that a lot of breed associations have a universal birth date of January 1. So on January 1, that horse is a year old. Okay, so it ages a year on January 1st, even if it was born in June. So that could mean that a horse born early in the year has a 6 month advantage when it comes to selling that horse at yearling sales or getting that horse started under saddle or entering that horse in some of these aged events, these futurities that, depending upon your discipline, might be for 2, 3, 4, 5 year old horses. They're just having more time to get ready for those events. The other reason people want to breed early might be because you have a mare that's difficult to get in full, and you're anticipating you're going to need more than the average couple cycles, 2 or 3 chances, to get them bred while that stallion is available. The key thing to remember that if you're breeding early, you absolutely must consider how you're going to manage that mare and where you have the available facility to foal that mare out in. So we showed on that first slide those real extreme temperatures of 30 some below zero. If your mare foals in that weather, that foal just is not going to survive. Okay. Even if you were there very, very quickly, the odds of it surviving a negative 30-degree day is slim. However, this picture I have on this slide too is from a few years ago, and this was May 10th. Okay, so you see snow on the ground. That foal was born the beginning of April, so it was a few weeks old at that point. But we are known to have extreme weather even in May, and sometimes in June we have cold rain showers. You just really have to consider the months that you're foaling and really have a backup plan for if it's early in the year, definitely having a heated facility. And if it's later in the spring, at least having some shelter where there's dry and wind breaks and can keep that foal healthy. Okay, so let's skip to talk about the artificial lighting. So how do we trick a mare into cycling earlier than her natural breeding season? And that's through artificial lighting. If you want to do this, you want to start administering artificial lighting to the mare approximately 2 months before you want to have that mare ovulate. Okay, so an example is if you want to have a January foal, you're going to need to breed her in February, and you're going to need to start her light therapy or artificial lights in November of the previous year. Okay, so 60 days at least. So exactly how do we do this? You require 16 hours of light and 8 hours of darkness in order to do this. So most people would prefer to use a timer so that's very consistent, because if you forget, you get home from work late one day and don't get the mare put inside or something along those lines, it can kind of reset their system or not work as quickly and efficiently as we'd like it to. If you're having them in an indoor stall, typically one big bright 100 watt to 200 watt light bulb in a stall is going to be sufficient. A general rule of thumb is that you should be able to read a regular magazine in all areas of that stall. So the light needs to be bright enough for that. There are monitors. You can use a lot of, I forget exactly the name of it, but there are monitors where you can determine how bright the light is. And there's also on phone apps, a lot of times you can determine how bright the light is, make sure that it is truly bright enough. If you want to keep them in an outdoor pen, a lot of times you can install bright floodlights that reach all corners of the pen where that mare would be housed. And then the other option is the picture shown here. And these are individual masks that you put on your mare. They're battery operated, and they have a timer that allows the mare to have the right amount of daylight right on that individual mare. So this is good if you have one mare that you want to keep in a group of other horses and you don't want to be able to have to put them inside or keep them in a separate pen under lights. Keep in mind that when you increase the daylight, that you're also going to encourage shedding of the winter coat. So you're going to require a little bit more management there through additional shelter, maybe consider blanketing your mare and other nutritional adjustments to accommodate for that shedding of their coat early. The other thing people say is, well, they need 16 hours of light. I'll just leave the lights on all the time and I won't have to worry about it. And that's not as effective. You do need that period of darkness in order to for this to work the best. Okay, so let's switch and talk about when to breed a mare, or when to get ready to breed the mare, when to bring that into the vet, when to start thinking about this process. So if the mare is currently pregnant, obviously you need to wait for her to foal, right? And if you want to have the tightest foaling or pregnancy to foaling interval, you might consider breeding her on what's known as the foal heat. And this is the first heat that happens after the mare has foaled. Typically, you'd want to bring that mare in for an exam at 7 days post foaling to see where she's at. The foal heat breeding might be an option for you and for that mare if the delivery was normal, meaning no major traumas, no major problems through delivery. The placenta was passed in the normal time frame within 3 hours after the birth of the foal, and you don't see any abnormal discharge past the first day or so of that delivery of the foal. If any of these things were out of the ordinary, you want to give that mare more time to recover before considering breeding. But full heat breedings are certainly an option to keep that mare as early as possible in the season. If your mare is open and currently not pregnant, you have a lot more decisions to make. So then that's where you decide when do you want to foal in the following year. If the mare has not been under lights, you're going to have a tough time at this stage of the game moving her up because they're naturally going to start to cycle and ovulate in May anyway. So at this time, if they haven't been under lights, you're just going to have to wait till they go through that transition. There are some options to speed that transition or smooth that transitional phase along that you can visit about with your veterinarian. Oftentimes, vets are going to want to evaluate that mare early in their cycle. So the second or sometimes the third day of estrus, they're going to want to bring that mare in and see where they're at. So how do we know when they're in estrus, or oftentimes when they're in heat is the common term that people, laymen, like to use. So the definition would be when they're receptive to the presence of the stallion. However, most people with just a mare or two at home don't have access to a stallion or don't have a stallion at home either, okay? So how else can you determine when they're in heat? You'll maybe see some increased movement and vocalization that's out of the ordinary for the behavior of your mare. The more you know your mare and the more you watch your mare, the more you'll be able to determine when she's coming into heat. They'll have more frequent urination. Oftentimes that urine will be thicker or cloudier. They will stand more often in a squatting posture or breeding posture with a raised tail. Mares, when they are in heat, will sometimes lean on the fence towards another horse. Some horses will tease or present signs of heat to new horses that come into the operation, or if there is a pen and geldings or a gelding that's housed with the mare, they will show signs of heat to the gelding maybe more readily. Some mares will show signs of heat to other mares, okay? Something to consider is that if you're not familiar with this or haven't noticed it in your mare before, they might just be one that doesn't show real obvious signs of heat. Okay, and some mares aren't going to show those signs of heat if they're in a group or if they're stressed in a strange place. And then particularly some mares with foals will suppress signs of heat and not be readily, you won't be able to readily detect it. So a lot of times we say, do your best when you think they're in heat, bring them into the vet and we'll be able to, the vet will be able to determine where they're at in their cycle. A couple interesting facts about heat that you should know as well is that it typically only lasts 3 to 7 days. So you don't have a whole long time period to get your mare checked. Ovulation typically is going to occur in the last 1 to 2 days of that mare's heat behavior. Mares can vary in length and intensity of estrus. So some mares might have really short heat cycles of 4 or 5 days. Some may have very long ones of 8, 9, 10, 11 days. It really varies from mare to mare, and it might vary from month to month as well. Really keep a detailed behavior record of your mare throughout the season. And if you have the previous year's records, even better. If not, start to document their behavior on a day-to-day basis. And that'll help you determine when they're in heat as well. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about how you can manipulate the estrus cycle. And oftentimes these are with hormones use, and these are prescribed by a vet. So you're going to have to get with your veterinarian to kind of discuss what might work for you in your operation and what's going to work best for your mare to get her to be able to manipulate her estrus cycle to get her bred. Okay. So a couple terms that you might hear is short cycling. So they'll hear you, a mare is short cycling, and that's to bring her back into heat in a shorter time period than she would naturally. Oftentimes, this is used, or the hormone used is prostaglandin. The trick is that a CL must be present on the ovary, and it's usually around 6 days post ovulation when that CL is present and receptive to the prostaglandin, where you can thereby go and short cycle her back around. So after you give her that prostaglandin, she's typically going to return into heat 2 to 5 days later and ovulate 7 to 12 days after that hormone is given. And this can shorten the mare cycle up by approximately 1 week. So if you think about it, if you're trying to get your mare bred in, say it's mid-May and you're finally getting around to getting your mare bred, by the time you breed her and do a pregnancy check, unfortunately she isn't bred. Sometimes it's recommended or be a good idea to short cycle her back around. That's going to save you time in the long run, especially when we're trying to beat a breeding time clock up here in the north. Because a lot of times we say the stallions do stop sending semen around that July 1st time frame. Another hormone that's used to manipulate the estrous cycle is one that's used to ensure the mare ovulates or hasten her ovulation a little bit. And there's a couple different ones that are used in horses. One is HCG, and the other one is known as lorelin. And it usually results in ovulation around 36 hours after administering this hormone. It's not exactly like clockwork, and sometimes mares can frustrate us and not ovulate when we want them to, and we'll talk about why that's kind of important, particularly when we're shipping semen later on. The other hormone that many people are familiar with is something called altrinogest or Regumate. It is a progestin or a progesterone, and it's a regulation of estrus during that transitional phase when it's often used to manipulate that estrus cycle. It can also be used to either sync mares up together so that you're breeding them at a similar time frame. So you're having to haul to the vet, or you're getting semen from the same stallion station and you want them to be bred in a similar time frame. We can sync them together. Or maybe you're live covering and you don't want all of the mares to be ready to be bred at the same time. You can stagger those estrus cycles. So it can be used in a few different ways. But those are some common hormones just to be aware of that you might hear your vet prescribe and administer to your mare. We're going to jump and just mention some of the common breeding options that we have up here. So live cover is certainly an option. We aren't going to discuss much on that today. If you're a mare owner and you're choosing to do live cover, oftentimes you're going to be a little bit at the mercy of the stallion owner to cover the mare according to their procedures and protocols. You'll need to bring your mare to the stallion for live cover. You also have options with artificial insemination, and that can be done a couple different ways. You can have artificial insemination occur with fresh semen where the stallion is in the same location or on site of the mare. So maybe you're bringing your mare to a stallion station and they're going to AI with fresh semen. The other way to AI is through cooled or shipped semen. So if you're keeping your mare in North Dakota and you want to breed to a stallion in Texas or somewhere else across the nation, an option often is to ship that semen overnight in a cooled form. Frozen semen can be useful because it can be ready whenever your mare is ready. So cooled semen gets shipped overnight. You really have to time everything up right. Your mare has to be ready and cooperate. Whoever's delivering the mare, the courier service has to be ready and cooperate. No major snowstorms, delays in the package delivery. Whereas frozen semen, you can get that semen available weeks or months before your mare is ready to be inseminated. So it's there and ready to go when she is. However, frozen semen requires additional management, and it's not always an option at all vet clinics due to the additional time management or just the additional level of skill that's required as well to breed with frozen semen. So keep that in mind. Before you sign a contract, make sure that whatever vet or breeding center that you're utilizing knows what type of semen you're going to get and make sure that they're able to handle that appropriately. We're not going to really, I'm just going to briefly touch on embryo transfer and advanced techniques. We're not going to cover them in any depth, but just know that it's available and it's an option. However, not in North Dakota. So I'm not aware of a facility that conducts embryo transfers in North Dakota. It requires, again, a lot more staff and skill and recipient mares and a lot more management. So when we're talking embryo transfers that are being conducted on mares in North Dakota, typically they're having to be shipped out of state There might be a few people that are doing a handful of them for their own operations, but I'm not aware of any that are publicly available at this time. And then there's advanced techniques as well, and we won't get into those things like ICSI that are becoming more popular these days. But again, you need to ship your mare out of state to a facility that has the capabilities of doing some of those advanced reproductive techniques. So for the interest of time today, we're just going to visit a little bit about managing a mare that you plan to AI with cooled ship semen. I think this is probably the most common option available to mare owners and the one that's chosen the most often. Key things to know. You need to know the collection days of your stallion, that stallion of choice. So some stallion stations collect just on odd days, some collect just on even days, some collect on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and some are very strict on absolutely not collecting on an off day. So you have to set up your mare and prepare your mare to be ready according to when the semen is available to be shipped and when it's going to be available to get to you. You also need to know the delivery options for your area. So this can be a trick in North Dakota as well. Typically, overnight couriers that develop or deliver in North Dakota can be private. If the stallion is a handful of hours away or just a state away, some people will go and physically drive, pick up that semen, and get it to their mare as soon as possible within the next day or so. So private delivery or a private courier is one option. Other common ones are FedEx, UPS, and Speedy. However, most rural areas in North Dakota do not offer Saturday delivery. You also want to make sure you specify whether that's going to get delivered to the vet clinic or the place where your mare is getting bred, or if that box of semen should be held at the shipment center, so the FedEx shipment center or distribution center, or the UPS distribution center for you to go pick up and take to your vet. The other option and terminology you'll want to know about is counter to counter, and that means it's going straight from the counter at the stallion station straight to directly to the counter where your mare is. And that's via airline or an airport option in your area. So in North Dakota, this might not be an option in all areas. You have to see which airports are available and which airlines are at those airports in order to get the semen flown to you. And that is usually for same day delivery. Okay, so they're collecting it in the morning, they're getting it on a plane and getting it to you that afternoon or evening at the latest. Oftentimes in North Dakota too, because of our shortage of breeding facilities, the mare owner will be responsible for picking that semen up and getting it to the mare wherever she's going to be bred at. So keep that in mind if you're doing a counter to counter option. A few other things to consider when we're managing a mare to be bred with cooled shipped semen. The mare cycle is tracked quite closely. And when a suitable follicle develops, along with other indications of that mare being in estrus and progressing towards ovulation, the stallion station is notified of the date that the anticipated semen is needed. So this might be a day or 2 or 3 before your mare is ready to ovulate. You're going to work with your vet and the stallion station to say, hey, my mare is getting ready. We anticipate we're going to need semen on this date or that date. Okay. Often the mare is going to be checked very early on the day of the shipment to confirm that she is indeed progressing or that she hasn't accidentally progressed too far and has already ovulated. Okay. In that case, you would want to cancel the order or potentially cancel the order. So oftentimes you need to check them early. A lot of these stallion stations have a 7 or 8 a.m. cutoff. All those details are going to be in your contract that you're going to want to know quite thoroughly. In a perfect world, the semen arrives on time when it should and is evaluated and it's in great condition. The motility is great and you go ahead and get your mare bred. The mare is bred and it returns to the vet for an ovulation check, usually in the next day or 2, to make sure that that mare did indeed ovulate. If she did not, you may need to start over and request another dose of semen. If working with your veterinarian, they think that she'll wait and hold in time to get more semen delivered before she does indeed ovulate. So there's a lot of moving parts to this, and being comfortable with the terminology and the process and the procedures is really helpful on the mare owner's end. So here's some other times when your mare is likely to be checked after she's been inseminated or bred. Okay, you're going to check her for ovulation, like we stated, because if she didn't ovulate, you're going to need to breed her again. if it's outside the timeline when that semen is determined to still be viable in the mare. Then after that, after ovulation, you'll have your first pregnancy determination at 14 days. So you want to bring your mare back for an ultrasound to have that detected at 14 days. Some vets can do it at 13 or a little earlier, but work with your vet to determine what day works to bring her back. Typically, you want to make sure that you do get that first pregnancy check at 14. Oftentimes, because this is when there is a possibility for twins to be detected, and twins in horses are not a good thing, not exciting, because oftentimes they do not carry twins successfully to term. So there are some options that you can visit with your vet about how to remedy that situation if you do detect twins at that first pregnancy check at day 14. Oftentimes, an optional check is day 21, but I encourage people that are shipping semen to go ahead and check that next week too, because early embryonic death occurs frequently. And if you can determine it's early, you can short cycle that mare back around and get her bred earlier. So I always think it's worth doing a 21 to 20 day, 24-day check to make sure that she's still bred. Some people do choose to skip that check and don't come back until the time frame that we call kind of the heartbeat check, which is sometimes around 28 to 35 days. We do recommend that you get them checked at this time to make sure that the pregnancy again is growing normally, everything looks okay. Sometimes if things aren't looking okay, there's solutions that veterinarians can implement to increase the chances of pregnancy survival. One important thing to note is that unfortunately, if the pregnancy is lost in the mare after day 35, often that mare will not come back into heat or cycle again that year and will not be able to be bred again that year. Okay, so I think it is important to get that mare checked before that 35 day so that you know whether she was pregnant at that time or not. Let's say she was pregnant there. The next time, a good time to check is at day 60. An interesting check at day 60 is that oftentimes you can fetal sexing of the foal can determine whether it's a female or a male. So that's kind of interesting for some people. And then also you know that if the pregnancy was there at 35 days, but not there at 60 days, that unfortunately the mare will have to wait until the next season to be bred. And then another time is late gestation. So later in the summer, early fall, just to make sure everything is progressing normally and that mare is still pregnant. And those can be worked with your veterinarian to work around their schedule and what's best for your mare. All right, so let's talk about just a few things just to review and overview health care of breeding a mare. So you're going to need to have that vaccination deworming plan, and you're already on those. I'm sure if you're taking care of your mare, you have a vaccination and deworming plan in place. It is going to be a little bit different once your mare is bred. So at a minimum, you want to have those core vaccines before the mare is bred. So tetanus, Eastern and Western encephalitis, West Nile virus, and then equine herpes virus series at 5, 7, and 9 months. So that's the additional one that maybe you aren't doing for an open mare. Okay. The other thing to think about is performing a fecal count and seeing whether your mare is a low shedder or a high shedder. We did do a webinar a few years back about deworming and vaccination, so that'd be a good refresher if you want to get into the details of that a little bit more. But foals are very susceptible to parasites. So regardless of the egg count and shedding, it's often recommended by many vets to deworm the mare 30 days prior to foaling and then immediately after foaling as well. But again, visit with your vet about the recommendations in your area. You also want to make sure that you provide regular hoof care throughout the pregnancy and late gestation, and certainly while she's raising that foal as well. And something to think about is that poor quality hoof care or lamenesses or foot problems or leg strains, they can create pain in the mare. And pain in a pregnant mare is never a good thing, okay? So that can put the pregnancy at risk as well. Dental care is important to still be done on your brood mares. Oftentimes it's recommended that if possible, this procedure and any procedure that requires sedation should be scheduled after the mare foals, so while she is not pregnant and before rebreeding. And this just helps reduce the risk of any side effects of that mare being sedated. And then the other thing to think about is that foaling facility preparation again, always going back to our tough weather challenges. make sure that you have a plan and a backup plan for where you can foal that mare out safely in the spring months in North Dakota. Next, we're just going to briefly touch on nutrition and feeding, not certainly going to any depth on this. This can be a really deep topic, but just to remind everybody that you want to maintain a proper body condition of that mare in a 5 or a 6 on the body condition scale or score. Okay. And that scale, it ranges from 1 to 9. So 5 or 6 is right in the middle. That is a horse that will be at the best odds of conceiving and maintaining and being able to raise a foal. Okay. If they're a little on the thin side, that's not good. But on the flip side, you also don't want your brood mares to be obese either. That can be a challenge for them as well. During the first months of gestation or those first 2 trimesters, the nutritional requirements are similar to the maintenance levels of your mare previously. Not a whole lot changes. However, that doesn't mean that she shouldn't be receiving good nutrition through a vitamin and mineral balance package or a ration balancer if she doesn't need any extra calories. The last few months of gestation, as we get into that 3rd trimester, that foal is really growing rapidly, and the mare has an increased need for energy and protein requirements, along with the vitamins and mineral package that she should already be on as well. So it's recommended that if you're not feeding a super high quality forage, to improve that, maybe adding a little alfalfa, if that's something that fits into your feeding program, would be a good idea. And then certainly a supplemental grain formulated for brood mares is important in this 3rd trimester as well. Something else to remember is that 3rd trimester is going to be occurring in the middle of winter for most of our mares that are being bred in North Dakota. So the increase in calories is needed in the winter anyway. So really keep a close eye on that body condition score. We don't want to get behind on our mares. And on the flip side, we don't want them to become obese. So get your hands on your mare. It can be hard to see with all their extra winter hair. Get your hands on your mare, maybe ask your veterinarian or a trusted equine expert in your area to give you a good opinion of what body condition score your mare is at, and you can adjust their ration from there. All right, so we've kind of whipped through a few things today. Please enter any questions that you have in the chat box, and you can unmute your mic and ask them verbally as well. Before we get to questions, I do want to point out that next week, we are going to talk about foaling and foal management in northern climates. So today we just talked about, if you're thinking about breeding your mare for 2026, here's some things to think about. Next week, we're going to talk about, okay, maybe you have a pregnant mare at home that you want to refresh her on, or you're going to breed your mare this year and you want to be extra prepared about what to think about and know about when it comes to that mare foaling next year. So we'll talk about preparation of the mare and facilities prior to foaling. We're going to talk about the signs of imminent foaling, so how to know that mare is getting close. We're going to talk about the 3 stages of foaling and the importance of each step. We're going to talk about post-foaling mare management, so how to take care of that mare after she's foaled, and then, of course, care of that newborn foal. So we'll talk about what to look for, how to know things are going right, and probably more importantly, how to know things are going wrong and what to do and what we can do to fix them. So those are some good things that will be happening next week. And then lastly, we had just a short period of time here to visit with you over the noon hour. We couldn't get into real deep details, but here's some good resources if you want to dig in a little bit deeper. So the University of Minnesota Extension has some good resources on breeding mares up in the north. The Equine Reproduction Laboratory at Colorado State University has many, many free resources available on their website, as well as many books and online courses that are for purchase. Those are both university extension resources that are really, really good. I did mention that the NDSU webinar series, we have covered some of these similar topics in previous years. So winter facility management, how to take care of your horses in the dead of winter up here in northern climates, winter care, and some of those nutrition topics that come into play as well. So those are some resources that I highly recommend that you check out. All right, so
Paige, here's what I heard you say. Holy smokes. This is a lot and it's so good. Okay. So here's what I heard you say. Do your research. Research is super important. You have to know what you're getting into if you're going to do this. Because once you start, it's a whole cascade of events and effects that happen because of it. So do your research. Financially, know where you're at, but also in that research, know what this could potentially cost for all the steps of the thing. Understand the requirements, especially for like breed associations. If that's something that you're interested in and you're going to do, really important to look at those requirements so you're doing it appropriately at the appropriate time and following those things. Management. I heard a lot about moving parts and how it's important to manage all those pieces. And then the last part, animal awareness, is what I grabbed out of that. So just really being aware of your animal, the nutritional status of them, the body condition score of them. Like Paige said, get your hands on them. Really be there and really know that animal. And so I heard those things. Now, if it feels overwhelming because that was a lot, that's okay. It's doable and it can be done really successfully. It's just best if we have all of the pieces in order before we start. So with that, we did have a question about what does international shipping look like of semen?
Oh, that's a good question. So you'll have to get in touch with the stallion station or whoever is managing the stallion, and it will determine what you can do. So some stallions are cleared to ship semen overseas and to specific countries, and some are not. So there's extra testing that needs to be done. Just because your stallion doesn't offer semen internationally doesn't mean that it won't if you request it or ask, but it is an extra step in a procedure. So get with the stallion station and the stallion owner and ask those questions ahead of time.
Okay, very good. Are there other questions that folks would like to ask? There was a request to put the resources in the chat, and so I'm working on that as we're talking through these things. I'm just going to throw a few links in there. Of course, if you registered and you did because you're on here, you'll be getting an email, and I do typically put the resources in that email as well. And so there'll be clickable links in there also.
That there is a plethora of great information out there, and it never hurts to be more prepared and more educated than you think you need to be. There's a lot to know, but don't feel like you need to be an expert in any field. It's just the more comfortable you are with the terminology and how things might potentially work and how things might go, the smoother sailing it'll be. Breeding can be a little stressful. It can happen very quickly, and things need to happen at just the right time. So it can be a lot, but like Mary said, do your research, check out those resources, visit with the stallion owners and your veterinarians to make sure that you're set up to have the best success.
Okay, with that, we'll be back next week talking about foaling management. And so come on back next week. If you registered for all of them, you'll get the reminder. And if not, I will send the link out when I send the recording.